Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
They say every family has a golden child, the one who can do no wrong, who lights up the room just by existing, who gets applauded for things the rest of us would be scolded for. In my family, that person was my younger sister Alyssa, the blonde, blue-eyed cheerleading miracle who got her first iPhone at 11, her own car at 16, and a full-blown catered Sweet 16 party with rented ponies and a live DJ. While I was told that gifts aren't love, when I asked for a $50 art set on my birthday, I learned early that I wasn't the kind of daughter people celebrated. I was the easy one, the independent one, the one who made straight A's not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew that if I didn't do it on my own, nobody else was going to care. You know how they say being ignored hurts more than being yelled at? That's the story of my life. Every school play, every science fair, every award ceremony where I stood up on stage with trembling hands and a nervous smile. I looked for them, my parents, hoping they'd be in the crowd. Sometimes they were. Most times, they weren't. But they never missed Alyssa's cheer competitions. They flew to 3 different states for her tournaments. Once, they even drove 10 hours through a snowstorm just to watch her perform for 4 minutes. That was the same year I got accepted into a prestigious summer program in DC. They didn't come to see me off. They said, "That's great, Rach. Let us know how it goes." I didn't even ask anymore by the time college came around. I picked the nearest university with a solid academic reputation and scholarships because I knew I wasn't getting any help from home. Alyssa, meanwhile, stayed home for a year to find herself, which somehow involved weekly spa visits, a European trip with her friends paid for by her dad's credit card, and a brand new MacBook she needed for her digital marketing aspirations. At family dinners, she would show off her Instagram growth while I sat quietly, eating mashed potatoes and wondering how it was possible to feel this invisible around people you've known your whole life. So when graduation came around, my college graduation, I wasn't expecting much, but I held on to a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd show up this time. Maybe my 4 years of hard work, my double major, my published thesis, my scholarships, my unpaid internships, all the nights I stayed up until 3 while my friends were out partying, maybe that would mean something to them. I wasn't asking for balloons or a limo. I just wanted to look out into that crowd and see my mom and dad waving. I wanted someone to hold my damn purse while I got my diploma. I sent the details weeks in advance. I followed up twice, gently. And then, the night before the ceremony, I got a text. It was short, casual, like a grocery list. "Hey, sweetheart, we're feeling a little worn out from the week. Think we're gonna sit this one out. Let us know how it goes. Proud of you." I stared at it for a full minute, rereading it like maybe the words would change if I blinked hard enough. Proud of me, too tired. Sit this one out, like my graduation was a movie they didn't feel like watching. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone. I didn't cry, not right away. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what kind of parents are too tired to show up to their child's college graduation? The next morning, I got up early, curled my hair, put on the dress I'd bought months ago, and painted on a smile so convincing that even my roommate didn't notice I'd barely slept. As I walked into the auditorium, my heart still scanned the room. There was this stupid part of me hoping they'd surprise me. Walk in late with coffee cups in hand, maybe with flowers. They didn't, but I did get a surprise. Halfway through the morning, as I was sitting with the other graduates, clutching the inside of my robe to stop my hands from sweating, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and my chest went tight. Alyssa had posted a story. It was a boomerang. Her and my mom clinking champagne glasses in white fluffy robes, their hair wrapped in towels. The caption said, "Self-care Sunday with the besties." Yes, the goddamn nail polish emoji. I don't even remember what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was that numb, dull ache that comes when disappointment is no longer surprising. They weren't tired. They weren't sick. They weren't stuck in traffic. They had chosen Alyssa's spa day over my college graduation. They hadn't just skipped my moment. They'd replaced it. traded it in for steam rooms and facials, and they weren't even hiding it. Now let me ask you something. Can you imagine sitting in a crowd of hundreds, about to walk the stage and accept a diploma you bled for, and realizing your parents couldn't be bothered to show up because they'd rather get a seaweed wrap with your sister? What would you have done? Would you smile and move on? Would you confront them? Or would you do what I did? Stay silent, play it cool, wait for the microphone. Because I had a secret, one I hadn't even told them. That morning, just before walking into the building, I'd opened a letter from the dean. I was selected as valedictorian. That meant a speech. That meant a microphone. That meant 10,000 people, live broadcast, and no way to take back what I might say. So I smiled, and I waited, and I started planning. Because some words are too heavy to carry in silence forever. I don't remember much about the walk across campus that morning, not because it wasn't meaningful or exciting or everything I had spent the last 4 years working toward, but because my body was moving on autopilot, guided by a kind of emotional muscle memory that kicks in when you've trained yourself for years not to expect applause, not to wait for the flash of a camera or the cheer of a familiar voice in the crowd, when you've been taught over and over again that your accomplishments belong to you and only you, because no one else gives a damn. And I know that sounds bitter, but when you've lived it long enough, it stops feeling like bitterness and starts feeling like truth. The university had gone all out for the ceremony. Streamers, banners, balloon arches, a full marching band that looked like it hadn't slept in 3 days. And the energy in the air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that makes your skin feel electric and your heart beat faster, not just because it's graduation, but because it's the kind of day that divides a life into 2 parts, the before and the after. I should have been excited. I should have felt proud. I should have been looking for my family, my friends, someone who could anchor me to the reality of the moment. But instead, I found myself clenching my jaw, forcing a smile that felt plastered on my face, and mentally counting how many hours I needed to survive before I could take off this robe, go home, and be alone with my thoughts. My name was called out early in the ceremony, right after the business majors, but before the fine arts students. And as I walked up to receive my diploma, there was a moment, a single heartbeat, where I scanned the crowd, holding on to some shred of delusional hope that maybe, despite the spa pictures, despite the text message, despite everything, they had changed their minds and shown up. But all I saw were strangers, proud parents clutching bouquets, siblings waving handmade signs, grandparents crying softly into tissue. And that's when it hit me. I had brought myself here. Every test, every late night, every paper, every breakdown, every moment I wanted to give up, I carried myself through all of it, alone. I walked back to my seat with my diploma in hand, the weight of it sinking into my lap like an anchor, and sat in silence as the rest of the names were called, applauses echoing like fireworks for everyone else. I clapped for people I barely knew. I smiled when I was supposed to. I laughed at the dean's jokes. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere darker, sharper, colder, somewhere where words were forming, dangerous ones, ones I never thought I'd say out loud. It wasn't until the final moments of the ceremony, when the dean stepped forward with a sealed envelope and a proud little smirk, that I snapped back into the present. He said my name, mispronounced it slightly, and handed me the envelope with a handshake that felt like it lasted too long. Inside was a printed note on embossed university letterhead. Congratulations, Rachel. You have been selected as this year's valedictorian. Please prepare a 5-minute speech to be delivered at the conclusion of the ceremony. A podium microphone will be provided. For a moment, I just stared at it. Valedictorian, me. The girl whose parents hadn't even bothered to come. The girl whose sister was currently getting a cucumber mask while I tried not to crumble in front of a crowd. The girl who never asked for the spotlight, but was now being handed the stage. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pride. What I felt was a cold, quiet fire that started somewhere deep in my stomach and crawled its way up into my throat, searing every word that had ever been silenced. Every apology I had swallowed, every time I'd let someone dismiss me, every moment I was told to be the bigger person while my sister played victim, and my parents clapped for her bare minimum. Ms. Davidson, my academic advisor and the closest thing I had to a mentor in the past 4 years, approached me backstage as the final speaker finished. She looked at me like she could see through the smile I had carefully arranged on my face, and when she touched my arm gently and said, "You don't have to hold back, Rachel," something inside me cracked, just a little, not enough to break, just enough to shift. I took the folded paper I had scribbled my notes on, a speech I'd written last week, full of safe lines and cliches about hard work, gratitude, and the future, and I slowly tore it in half. I didn't need that speech anymore. When the dean called me forward and motioned to the podium, I stepped up, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. I saw phones pointed at me, eyes locked, some people already wiping away tears because they assumed this would be another sentimental send-off full of reach for the stars and never give up. And for a second, I considered it. I considered playing nice. I considered giving the version of Rachel that everyone expected. The high-achieving, quiet, grateful girl who always smiled and never made trouble. But then I thought about that spa post. I thought about the empty seat that should have held my mother. I thought about the fact that if Alyssa had been giving this speech, they would have been front row, holding a sign with her face on it, live streaming the whole thing on Facebook. And I leaned into the mic, smiled wider, and said, I wasn't going to say anything. But then I saw the spa pictures. The crowd laughed, lightly confused, thinking I was making a joke. And maybe I was. Maybe it started as one. But what came next would turn that laugh into a silence so thick you could feel the tension pressing down on your shoulders. Because I was done being quiet. And I had 5 full minutes. And they were going to hear every second of it. There's something strange that happens when a microphone is placed in front of you, something almost primal, like a door unlocking inside your chest that you didn't know existed. And as I stood there beneath the blinding overhead lights of the university auditorium, staring out at a crowd of thousands, students in robes, faculty in formal regalia, parents gripping their phones with hands trembling from emotion, it occurred to me that while I had imagined this moment many times before, I had never imagined it like this, not as an act of celebration, but as a reckoning, not as a moment of gratitude, but of reckoning with every bitter, unspoken truth I had swallowed over 2 decades of playing the role of the overlooked daughter. I began as they expected me to, calm, composed, the perfect student, the diligent daughter, the high-achieving academic whose words carried weight but not malice. And I thanked the university for the opportunities, the professors for their guidance, my peers for their friendship and resilience, and the crowd responded with polite applause, not yet sensing the storm I was carefully ushering in with every syllable, not yet realizing that the speech they were expecting would unravel into something much more dangerous, something honest, something uncomfortable. But then, as my voice steadied and my gaze settled on the empty rows where my family should have been seated, the same seats that were now occupied by the uninterested relatives of other graduates, I felt the weight of that absence pressing down on my chest, and I decided in that moment that I wouldn't waste the most powerful 5 minutes I'd ever been given, pretending that everything was fine, because it wasn't fine, it had never been fine, and someone needed to say it out loud, even if it shattered the image my parents had spent their whole lives trying to protect. So I said, I almost didn't write a speech, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wasn't sure anyone who needed to hear it would actually be listening. There was a slight shift in the room then, a ripple of confusion, of curiosity, like people sensing a change in weather before the rain begins, and I continued, letting the words pour out now, steady and deliberate. But I decided to write one anyway, not for applause, not for recognition, but because silence is a burden I've carried far too long, and I think some truths deserve to be spoken, even if they make people uncomfortable. I paused, let the silence stretch just long enough to draw everyone in, and then I delivered the first cut. To the parents watching from the spa this morning, sipping mimosas with my sister. I hope the seaweed wrap was relaxing. I truly do, because your daughter here, the one standing at this podium, the one who just became valedictorian, walked this stage alone. There were audible gasps, not exaggerated ones like in movies, but soft, stunned intakes of breath that told me the audience was no longer just listening. They were leaning in. I pressed on, unflinching, my voice clear. Some of you might be wondering why I'd bring up something so personal on a day meant for celebration, but I think it's time we stop pretending that silence is noble and that politeness is the same as kindness. Because the truth is, being ignored hurts a hell of a lot more than being yelled at. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to stop pretending you weren't wounded in the first place. I spoke of birthdays forgotten, of the piano recitals attended by strangers, but not my family, of school projects I stayed up nights, perfecting that were brushed aside in favor of Alyssa's volleyball tryouts. I reminded everyone, not just my parents, but the entire crowd, that children remember. Not the gifts, not the vacations, but the moments of being seen or unseen, the glances that linger with pride, or look past them entirely. I told the story of the broken laptop, the one Alyssa ruined by spilling orange juice across the keyboard, and then blamed on me. I recounted how our parents believed her without question, and made me pay for a new one with my own savings. I was 16, I said, and I learned then that truth doesn't always win. Sometimes it doesn't even get heard. The audience was still, unmoving, as if time had paused to give weight to every syllable I threw into the air, like tiny grenades wrapped in velvet. Some faces looked away. Others looked angry, not at me, but at the idea that a child, their child, perhaps, might one day feel the same and speak so freely. But I wasn't done, not yet. There are a lot of people in this room who know what it's like to work hard in silence, to achieve in the shadows, to get straight A's and never hear "I'm proud of you," not because you're not loved, but because someone else in the family shines brighter in their eyes, I said, my hands gripping the sides of the podium now. Not with nerves, but with a kind of fierce ownership. This speech isn't just for me. It's for every forgotten sibling, every quiet achiever, every kid who learned to celebrate themselves because no one else would. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I just let the words settle like dust across a room that had gone completely still. I ended with something I hadn't planned to say. A sentence that rose to the surface as naturally as breathing. To my sister Alyssa, I hope today was relaxing, because tomorrow people are going to be asking questions. And then I walked off that stage. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't look back. Because sometimes the most powerful sound in the world isn't the roar of a crowd. It's the silence that follows when you finally speak the truth. The thing about dropping a truth bomb in front of an audience of thousands is that there's no button to rewind, no polite cough to erase the echo of what's already been said, and certainly no way to filter or soften the aftershock once the words land exactly where they were meant to, right in the hearts of those who never thought you'd have the guts to say them aloud. As I stepped down from the podium, diploma in hand, and heart pounding like it was trying to outrun the chaos I had just unleashed, I didn't feel proud or victorious or vindicated in the way people probably imagine you're supposed to after delivering a moment like that. I felt empty, not in a regretful way, but in the way that happens after holding something heavy for too long. And then suddenly, it's gone, and your arms are still locked in that stiff position, unsure what to do now that the weight is no longer there. I didn't make it more than 20 feet before the first whispers began rippling through the crowd like wind across tall grass, soft then rising, like the slow swell of a wave you know is going to crash hard once it reaches the shore. Some people clapped. A few actually clapped. Not the polite kind either, but the bold, almost defiant kind of applause that comes from people who'd clearly been holding their own silence for far too long and saw mine as some kind of vicarious release. Others looked uncomfortable, as if I'd just walked into their living room and turned on a light they hadn't asked for. And then there were those who were just staring, frozen, shocked, not quite sure if what they'd witnessed was courageous, cruel, or some disturbing combination of both. I barely registered the dean standing nearby, blinking rapidly behind his gold-rimmed glasses like he was hoping he'd misheard me, or maybe praying someone would hand him a PR script before this speech hit the school's official YouTube page. But he didn't say anything, didn't even try to stop me, just stood there, hands clasped in front of him, nodding ever so slightly like someone trying to convince himself that this was all somehow fine. It wasn't, and we both knew it. By the time I reached the edge of the auditorium, my phone was vibrating so violently in my purse, it felt like a trapped animal. Notifications pouring in faster than I could breathe. I pulled it out, half dreading what I'd see, and there it was, the video of my speech already circulating online, shared by a classmate with the caption, "Valedictorian goes savage on parents mid-speech. Must watch." It had hundreds of likes within minutes. Comments were piling up, some supportive, others calling me petty or dramatic or attention-seeking, and a few tagging Alyssa directly, which I knew was the beginning of the real storm. And speak of the devil, before I even had time to put the phone away, a new notification popped up. A video from Alyssa's Instagram, freshly posted, barely 2 minutes old. Her face was blotchy, eyes red, makeup smudged in that artful way only someone who still wants to look good while crying can pull off, and she was sniffling as she stared into the camera with the practiced sadness of someone who turned emotional manipulation into an Olympic sport. "I just don't understand why Rachel would do this," she said, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. Today was supposed to be about celebrating her, and instead she used it to attack her family, to attack me. I didn't do anything to deserve this. I've always supported her. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, none of it was, but because the sheer audacity of her pretending to be the victim in a story. Where she had always been the center, the favorite, the protected one, was so absurd it bordered on surreal. I stared at the video, watched her blink back fake tears, watched as comments rolled in beneath the post, half of them praising her strength, the other half demanding answers. And I realized that what I had unleashed wasn't just a family squabble aired publicly. It was a narrative war, and both sides were sharpening their versions of the truth. The first call came from my mother. I let it ring. The second came from my father, then another from my mother, and finally a long, blistering text that lit up the screen in a block of furious, guilt-laced prose. "Rachel, how dare you embarrass this family like that? We raised you better. What you did was cruel and unnecessary and utterly disrespectful. I don't know what you were trying to prove, but congratulations. You've hurt everyone who loves you. Not a single apology, not even an acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just a slap on the wrist wrapped in the passive-aggressive language of parental disappointment. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because the damage had already been done, and whether they liked it or not. People were talking. Some were defending them, sure, but many weren't. And that was the part that surprised me most. How many strangers, people I'd never met, reached out through messages and comments to say, "I felt this," or "I wish I'd said what you said," or "Thank you for speaking what so many of us can't." It didn't make me feel heroic. It didn't even make me feel better. But it made me feel less alone. And that counted for something. Later that night, as I sat in my dorm room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and graduation balloons I had bought for myself, because who else would, a message popped up that made my heart stall for half a beat. It was from Danny, an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her message was short, but it hit harder than anything else that day. "Girl, I think your sister's been lying about more than just today." I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen, adrenaline already starting to creep into my limbs. Danny had never been dramatic. She wasn't the type to stir up trouble without reason. And if she was reaching out after all this time, it wasn't to gossip. It was because something mattered. So I typed back one word, "What?" and waited, the silence stretching long and tight. Because if what she said was true, then the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There's a peculiar kind of tension that settles over you when you're waiting for a truth you didn't ask for. Not the sharp, anxious kind that makes your hands sweat or your heart race uncontrollably, but something more sinister, like a quiet storm pressing against the inside of your chest. A storm you're not entirely sure you're ready to weather. I stared at my phone long after sending that single-word reply to Danny. Long after the screen went dark. Long after the noise outside my window, car engines revving, laughter from students still celebrating, had faded into a distant hum. Every second stretched itself thin, each one whispering the same warning that once I saw whatever she was about to send, I could never unsee it, never unknow it, never again claim innocence in the version of our family story that had already been so thoroughly fractured. When the screenshots finally came through, grainy images of old Instagram DMs, blurry text messages forwarded from group chats I hadn't known existed, I didn't flinch, I didn't gasp, I didn't even blink. I just read, line by line, message by message, and as the full weight of the betrayal settled onto my shoulders, a betrayal that had been rotting beneath the surface for years without my knowledge, something inside me shifted, not violently, not like a scream or a shatter, but like a final click in a lock that had been waiting to close for far too long. Alyssa hadn't just been the golden child. She had also been the architect of a carefully constructed narrative in which I played the bitter, antisocial, ungrateful sister, the one who, according to her, thought she was smarter than everyone, who acted like a victim every time she didn't get her way, who was emotionally manipulative and probably needed therapy. She had been saying these things about me for years, to her friends, to our mutual acquaintances, and worst of all to my own parents, who rather than confront me or even question any of it, had simply nodded along, absorbed it, and let it fester until it became the truth in their minds. There were messages from her to a guy I once dated, warning him that I was difficult and not over her issues. There were screenshots from a group of cheer moms, yes, cheer moms, in which Alyssa referred to me as the mistake child and laughed about how I was always so desperate to be seen. And worst of all, there was the confirmation I didn't even know I was waiting for. A forwarded email, years old, from the admissions office of a school I never got into, a school I had worked my ass off to apply to, and a response from my parents that included a forwarded message from Alyssa saying, "Trust me, this place wouldn't be good for her mental health. She's better off close to home." I felt sick. Not because I had lost something, the chance at that school, the boyfriend, the clean version of my family, but because all this time I had doubted myself. I had believed I was the problem. I had replayed arguments in my head, wondering if I had overreacted, if I had been too sensitive, too demanding, too hungry for something I should have been content to live without. I had gaslit myself for years, thinking maybe I was imagining the favoritism, maybe I was too proud, maybe I just didn't know how to love people who weren't built to love me the way I needed. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong. I had been right, all along. I didn't respond to Danny's messages that night, not because I didn't appreciate them. I did deeply, but because I needed silence. The kind of silence that isn't about running away, but about carving out space to hear your own thoughts for the first time. After a lifetime of being drowned out by everyone else's expectations and judgments, I needed to hear myself think, without the echo of my mother's disapproval or the shadow of my sister's curated perfection hovering over every decision I made. In the days that followed, the video of my speech continued to spread. Some media outlets picked it up. A few daytime talk shows used it as a discussion point about parental neglect and favoritism, about the unspoken wounds many adult children carry silently through life until something finally snaps. People debated whether I had gone too far. Others said I hadn't gone far enough. But none of them mattered, not really. Because this wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about revenge, at least not anymore. It was about release. My parents didn't call again, not after the voicemail I left them, measured, deliberate, and calm. in which I told them that I wasn't interested in repairing something that had never been whole to begin with. That I wasn't angry, not anymore. That I simply didn't have the energy to keep trying to earn a kind of love that only ever existed when it was convenient for them. That I was done being the daughter they could ignore and still claim they were proud of. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just said goodbye. And then I blocked their numbers. I moved out of the dorms 2 days later, packed everything I owned into the back of my Honda, the same car I had bought myself at 18 with saved up cash from a part-time campus job, and drove to the coast, to a small apartment I had signed a lease for weeks before, back when I still believed my family might be proud enough to help me move. They never offered. I never asked. That first night, I sat on the small balcony of my new place, watching the waves crash in slow rhythm against the shore, the sky turning a soft purple gray as the sun dipped behind the horizon. There was no one around. No congratulations. No family dinner waiting. Just me and the sound of the ocean and the faint smell of salt and freedom in the air. I thought about Alyssa, not with anger, but with clarity. I didn't hate her. I pitied her, maybe. Because the truth is, people like her build their lives on the validation of others. And when that validation runs out, when the spotlight dims, they're left with nothing but themselves. And I don't think she's ever truly met herself. I don't think she'd like what she finds when she does. As for me, I'm not sure where this story ends. Maybe it already has, maybe it's just beginning. I don't know if I'll ever speak to my parents again, or if they'll ever understand what they've lost. I don't know if Alyssa will ever stop painting herself as the victim. I don't even know if I did the right thing on that stage. But I do know this. For the first time in my life, I said what needed to be said, and for now, that's enough.